Stephen Blanks has been president of NSW Council of Civil Liberties since 2013, having been its secretary since 2005. Stephen has been a member of the Council of Civil Liberties since 1993. His particular civil liberty interests include asylum seekers, free speech, privacy, and racial vilification. He appears frequently in the media, commenting on issues involving civil liberties. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen Blanks, the usual way.
That was just absolutely fabulous, Alison. I don't know what I can say after that. Covered the field. But look, I'm going to start with something arising out of what's happened today in Federal Parliament with the passing of the lower house of the data retention laws. Laws where the drafting was finished just minutes before the bill was introduced into the House. When the bill was introduced into the House, the explanatory memorandum was not even available, let alone read by any of the parliamentarians voting on it. The debate in the lower house took a matter of a few minutes because it was all a stitch-up between Labor and the government, stitched up behind closed doors in a security committee of the Parliament, which excludes any members from minority parties or independents. The Parliamentary Joint Committee on Security and Intelligence, on Intelligence and Security, is made up of Labor and Coalition members only, no minority representation, and that's where the metadata retention law was negotiated and sealed. You don't need a Parliament for open debate. They can do it behind closed doors. But I've got to say, to their credit, at least Labor recognise that journalists are a pillar of democracy that can't be done away with, and so they negotiated reasonably hard for some special measures for journalists. So, for example, access to journalist metadata can only be done on warrant issued by a judge or a magistrate, and there is to be a new office, the Public Interest Monitor, created. This is an office which Civil Liberties has been advocating for years. Some of the states, such as Queensland, have someone in this position, and they will be informed of the application for a warrant and be able to make representations in the public interest as to whether or not the warrant ought to be issued. So tonight I want to predict a movement that is going to spread over the next few days. For those of you who are actively tweeting here tonight, this is to be tweeted. So it comes out of the Je suis Hebdo movement when there was that terrorist attack on Charlie Hebdo in Paris. Tonight I declare Je suis journalist. And I suggest you all do so too. And together we're going to campaign that the protections for journalists should be protections for everyone. I of course am in a privileged position because I'm a lawyer, and it is just obvious that if journalists are a pillar of democracy and freedom in our society, the very next pillar are lawyers. And so I hope that we'll come to that. I'm sure Alison is in the next category, academics.
Doctors.
Doctors, abortion clinics. There will be, over the next few days while this bill is going through Parliament, I am sure more and more groups and unions standing up and saying, Je suis journalist. What's journalist in French, by the way?
Journaliste.
Thank you. Journalist. So that's my prediction for what's going to happen over the next few days. Tweet it, publicise it, let's get a campaign going so that the protections which have been won for journalists will be won for all of us. Look, the next little thing that I want to do is just try a little exercise in free speech and just see how prepared we are in the current environment to exercise our free speech rights. Look, before we do this exercise, I'm just going to remind you of a few things. You all have your smartphones with you. They will be communicating with the nearest telecommunications towers, and records of which towers your phone is communicating with are being retained. Even without the data retention laws, those records are being retained. So I just need to warn you before we do this exercise that there are records of roughly where you are. They might not pin you directly to this room unless you've got your GPS locator on your mobiles. Many of you probably do without even realising it, without remembering that you've got some application on there that wants to know precisely where you are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to identify an act of terrorism and see whether, as a group together, and look, this is a group which I must say, I mean, Alison, I agree with everything she said. You, I'm sure, agree with everything she said. We're a group of like-minded people. There should be no problems doing this. Let's pick an act of terrorism and see whether we're all prepared to condemn it openly. So let's pick the most recent one, that Australian kid who apparently went to Iraq and was a suicide bomber in Tikrit, in the recent battle for Tikrit. Do we have a universal endorsement here that act of terrorism ought to be condemned?
I think he was stitched up and suicided.
Well, an individual point of view. That's interesting. But
We shouldn't have armed forces in Iraq.
No. We shouldn't have armed forces in Iraq. Well, it's interesting that the amount of silence that that question gets you, because that is going to cause you, that silence is going to cause you trouble next time you apply for a public service job. Because we have the Prime Minister saying, in effect, with the very learned Attorney General, that failure to condemn terrorism equals support of it. And we need to change our laws to make it illegal to fail to condemn terrorism. You saw the interview perhaps last year on Lateline of the representative of a group that I can never remember. Thank you, that one. Where this really became apparent. He was asked in a very aggressive way to condemn particular acts of terrorism by ISIS, and he refused to do so. And the next morning the Prime Minister came out and said, well, that ought to be a criminal offence. He's obviously a supporter of terrorism because he failed to condemn it. Right? So, by your silence here tonight, you are in danger of falling foul of the laws which will inhibit free speech to the extent that failure to condemn particular acts of terrorism will be taken to be support for terrorism, and support for terrorism is going to be criminalised to the extent of even expressing support with no consequence in your expression of it will be criminalised. That's the kind of society we are going to headlong, with the majority of the community, I think, just completely blindfolded about the consequences. Some people will have studied history and will have studied the McCarthyist era and what happened to people who failed to condemn communism and were taken therefore to be supporters of it. And the consequences for society, that kind of society is not a society which we really want, but that is one which we are taking ourselves towards. Democracy, now we have to talk a little bit about democracy because somebody put it in the title for tonight's speech. Democracy is a terribly misunderstood concept. Some people think democracy is just the ability to vote for somewhat every 3 or 4 years. And that so long as you get to go to a polling booth and vote, that makes it a democracy. But that's just not a full explanation. If that were true, of course, China would be regarded as a democracy. Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan would all be shining examples of democracies on that definition. We have to understand that democracy implies a series of arrangements. Started with the Magna Carta 800 years ago, that ensure that people have freedom to exercise, to meaningfully exercise choice, and to be able to express themselves. The High Court a few years ago found the freedom to engage in political communication implied in our constitution, our rights-free constitution. And that freedom is very important, but it's not the only requirement for a democracy. For a democracy, we need to be free from fear. It is what Alison was talking about, where the government is trying to make you afraid so that you don't exercise your freedoms, you don't enjoy all of your rights, you self-censor, you stop engaging in particular action because you're afraid. That is the antithesis of a real democracy. And for me, we are seeing in Australia now how this is playing out in some really practical ways. We are dividing the country between Australian citizens and aliens. And the aliens are the ones to be scared of. Now, it's a curious thing to try and do in Australia because most people in Australia haven't been here all that long. Enormous percentage, 25%, are either born overseas, Australian citizens born overseas, or parents were born overseas. Might even be higher than that. Yet the aliens amongst us are being portrayed as the enemy, and they're being denied fundamental rights and freedoms under our noses. So we have the security agencies now with the power to cancel people's visas because they're assessed to be a threat to national security. And this is done without any appeal rights, review rights, any reasons, any accountability whatsoever, no reports to Parliament about what steps have been taken, and the result is that people go straight into detention. And the thing that the Magna Carta, one of the things that the Magna Carta promised, if you recall, was no free man shall be imprisoned, condemned, without judgment by his peers or in accordance with due process of law. and strip away the sexist language and the reference to freemen as distinct from slaves and all that sort of stuff, and update that. And you get a proposition which is a fundamental proposition for the last 800 years of a free society, which is that the state cannot deprive you of your freedom, your liberty, without due legal process. And in Australia now, we have created a carve-out from that principle, a carve-out which applies to non-citizens, and which enables the state to imprison them without a trial, without telling them what they're accused of, without giving them any rights of review. It's the most serious attack on freedom and democracy that you can possibly imagine. And this, this has been going on for a few years now. The number of people who are deprived of their liberty as a result of this, it's not 1 or 2, it's not 3 or 4, it's somewhere between 50 and 100, could be more. It's a significant group who've effectively been disappeared off the streets. And this is a group who, a number of people in this group have been well integrated into the Australian community. A number of them are married to Australian citizens. They've been separated from their spouses. A number of them have children. They've been separated from their children. And all in the name of national security. And what national security demands is that we don't need to bother, the state doesn't need to bother with the inconvenience of having to prove a case in a court of law. Now, once we accept that ASIO and the security apparatus can do that in respect of non-citizens, how long is it going to be before they demand the ability to do it to the rest of us? And it's going to be coming. It's because these agencies have no regard for freedom, have no regard for democracy, have no regard for values, and they've got the politicians so scared that the politicians will give them whatever they want. So, with that, I think that is the thing which makes me afraid in Australia. I'm going to finish, I don't know how I've gone on time, but
You've got
another couple of minutes. Well, I'm going to finish anyway, because there is one skill which I'm going to recommend you all get, and that is you need to go to a crypto party. And it sounds like a lot of fun, but I suspect it's not a lot of fun. But the last couple of days I've been finding out what crypto parties are. Scott Ludlam is having a crypto party this Saturday night somewhere in Glebe, not this pub but some other pub in Glebe. And at this crypto party, if you bring your laptop, your phone and your USB, 3 essential requirements, you'll learn how to be able to communicate electronically, anonymously. And that is going to be an essential skill that everybody in our society is going to need. Crypto parties are going to be the social function for the next little while, must attend, must be a whole lot of fun. And so seek them out, get the skills, and go underground.
Yeah. On you, Scott!